Hi folks, welcome to another edition of the Omnis Hour. Turn this beautiful music down in the background to hopefully a dull roar. I know some of you don't like my background music. I'm trying to adjust it to be more pleasant to your ears and still pleasant to mine while I'm talking. Okay, so where are we at today? Well, a lot of folks caught my last episode, which was great, talking about the Merkaba, how it developed in a simulation multiverse, and basically how the first soul created the model for every other soul, which is kind of what was meant by created in God's image. Not a carbon copy. I'm sorry, you are not God, but you have the same facility for developing your soul that God developed for himself, through a lot more hard work than you'll ever have to do. Okay, so where are we going today? If you caught the last one and watched most of it, you'll know that the sound began cutting out a little over halfway through, and so many of you didn't get through the full slide deck. And we're unhappy about that, but I guess a lot of folks enjoyed the material, so we're going to continue in that same vein and add more to it so that hopefully anybody who's new here that didn't catch the other one will get most of what's necessary without having to rewind too much, which is kind of how my channel works. A lot of times you have to start from basic principles to get to new principles, and so there's a certain amount of review necessary to introduce new concepts. Okay, so let's talk about, as I like to do, first the background art, most of which is drawn by AI, I think. Some of which I think I may need to find a way to replace with something that nobody's going to sue me for copyright infringement. Basically, what you see behind you are four seemingly totally unrelated pictures. What I am going to assert is that they all represent a different visualization topology of what might be the same universe. And this is basically getting back to the core idea behind everything that I'm telling you, is that thought creates matter and energy. And it is thought energy which is thus fundamental. Thought energy is not a one consciousness. That's absurd. That's a silly anti-scientific notion. Thought is a quantum phenomena. So basically, a whole bunch of potential thinkers raising up one that was able to think beyond the others and add some structure to it. And that's how universes formed. So one presentation of a universe might be some view of the Milky Way galaxy. I think this is what I asked for, a James Webb Space Telescope view of the Milky Way. And this is, of four images, the one I like the most. It kind of looks like a crown of thorns around a chewy center. Another visualization might be some sort of, symbolic representation like we find in our zodiac here. Could be more complex one that includes some sort of interleaving of the Western zodiac and the Chinese zodiac, which, if you know, the two systems are quite different, but seem to have the same purpose of sort of providing a clock, if you will, for what's going on this planet. Another representation might be as, the Baghdad, the Harun al-Rashid, the 1001 Arabian Nights, with, the marketplace in the center, and then, the palaces and minarets of the imams and the sultan and the different organization within that particular vision of perfection. Or it might be this nice little rendition of what 1968 suburban America might look like. Nice little development without too much structure to it. A lot of trees still envisioned. Everybody's got a decent yard. Nobody's house is too much bigger than anybody else's. That might be a pleasant contrast to the perfection of the Allah God of 1,000 years ago. And this is kind of where we're going with this. Okay, so I'm going to call this one A Bittersweet Tale of Merkaba Metaphysics, How Personality and Emotions Evolved in the Simulation Multiverse. Okay, I think this is going to be very interesting and kind of connect a lot of the physics that I was talking about, physics, metaphysics that I was talking about yesterday with real world things today. Okay, so let's get back to our basic creation plan. This is a review of what, say, the first version of God might have been like. And it's a logical universe. Okay, and as I mentioned yesterday, the first logical step to having a logical universe, you have to have time. Because if you know anything about logic, you have to know about the order of evaluation of logical statements to actually know if they're true or false. Basically, in this logic universe, you have several programs that need to be running in parallel that God can set on autopilot, if you will. One program is basically to store a storage place for the ideas. Oh, I like that idea. That seems to be true. That seems to be useful, something I'm going to reuse. There's another library of ideas that, well, that didn't work. I didn't find a use for that idea. It wasn't really true in any sense I could use, but I'm going to save it as something that I might reuse later. Then you need basically a test to run against these ideas. So this is like the logical premise of each logical statement, the tester of that. And you need basically a place to store really dangerous bad ideas, things that really don't work, things you don't want to have in this logical universe. Illogical things, in other words, thoughts that don't make any sense. They're weird fantasies, okay? So this is basically how a thought universe might work. Let's see what it might look like in a different representation. This is going to be a new slide, so those of you who might have been getting bored with me repeating some things will be seeing something new now. So in the early mind of God, you can conceive of the first idea, the first version of God being sort of a time substrate. And, basically it's got some sort of one-dimensional frequency repeating again and again. And if you know anything about radio, you'll know that most radio technology is based upon a carrier frequency, which kind of defines the time substrate for radio waves. So that's kind of how this works. And then the little things you add on to that would be these logical ideas. And if the ideas look good, you keep them. If they don't look good, you remove them. Now, how do you know if they look good or not? You test something and see how long it lasts, how long it entertains God. Because there's only one conscious character at this point in this universe of logic. And so the test of a good idea is how long does it entertain the creator. And so you might look further down. This is like when these ideas first come into play. Later on, there's a time where the mixing of those ideas kind of becomes less exciting. I like the way that Audacity allowed me to draw this. You see that later on down the line, after the introduction of the new ideas, the frequency representation kind of just dribbles off, and it gets kind of boring. The frequency spectrum, you see. This is the mixed spectrum. And that point at which it kind of starts becoming boring is where you might want to conclude an experiment. How would you conclude a thought experiment? Well, you would take all these characters that you'd added, these logical propositions and operators and everything you need to conduct logic, and codify them. You say, okay, these are my characters I want to carry forward into the next simulation. So I'm going to store those either in well, they've already been developed, so they're going to be stored in Borg, and these new ideas are what's going to be stored from the next version of the simulation I run. So each version of the simulation is building on the concepts, the ideas of the previous simulation, and adding new ideas based upon the setup of the next experiment, which might have a different time substrate, and certainly would have a different set of primary characters. But again, it would have to have a starting point that was basically contiguous with the end of the previous experiment. Okay, so if you look at this time substrate, this sinusoidal wave, if you want to view it that way, kind of what goes on with time experiments is you set a base frequency, and you're running each cycle of the sine wave is one run of the experiment. And within each run, you can make changes anywhere within there that change the composite of that run. The base defines sort of a 0 point of energy, high entropy point. The peak defines an ordered point, a point of maximum creativity, if you will, maximum excitement in this version of the simulation. And then the players start getting bored. God gets bored. The other characters that are active in the simulation get bored, and eventually they start playing to cross purposes, and you have the whole simulation fall apart. A return to high entropy as the players playing against each other cancel each other out. Okay? So you can play the same simulation as many times as you want, and adding or subtracting different characters in each version till you get a version that you like. And that's the point at which a new simulation would begin. And when you hit this minimum point, that's the point at which you can change the time frequency. You can amp up God or amp down God to some new time substrate that suits the next version. Yeah, so time is not always flowing at the same rate. You might want time to go very quickly when you're dealing with logical concepts, which don't require any movement. When you're doing big stuff like building a galaxy, building a whole universe, you might want to have a time substrate that a lot happen very quickly. Otherwise, you'd be waiting a long time and getting bored while things were moving into position. Okay, so this ability to adjust the time substrate is kind of the most fundamental power of God. That's what God is always able to do, and that's what guides creation. Sometimes things need to happen quickly, sometimes things need to happen slow, and this is why we seem to be in kind of an acceleration phase of time, moving towards something that might seem pretty apocalyptic to some people who aren't aware of what we're working on here. Okay, so let's move from there down to close to modern times. Now, if you followed me yesterday, basically what I said was that after creating the first Merkaba version, the first universe, which is basically this cell structure, this basic cell structure of a soul. The innermost nucleus is where, you know, all the best stuff that you don't want to lose is gathered. Your good experience, your useful learning. The karmic membrane is what separates the useful from the potentially useful, but potentially dangerous. And that's kind of the Luciferian stuff, the stuff that's dual use technology, if you will. Then there's another outer membrane of non-player character separators from between you and this outermost layer that's kind of the evil layer. It's there, it serves a purpose. It's what attracts food and repels those who would eat you. And in a very simple soul, this is, you know, like a single cell organism. This maps very closely to how they work, in fact. And as we discussed yesterday, it also maps into how they don't work, how they dysfunction because their enemies are always trying to penetrate layers and either get into the center, the chewy center, or corrupt one of these other layers to start producing something that it's not supposed to have. And this is basically how you destroy cells. It's also how you destroy souls. This is another perfect example of the as above, so below principle. Okay, so as this experiment proceeded, the next phase was to build up another full layer of experience in the Merkaba. This layer had basically God's experience, and sort of isolated him from other possibly developing gods, so that he could, you know, kind of keep his cards to himself. If you've ever played poker, you know that you don't want people to peek at your cards because you don't want them to steal your ideas. And God didn't want anybody to steal ideas, especially ideas that were half-baked that might be dangerous. So there's good and bad in that. So then the experiment began running not inside the mind of God as it was up to this point, but starting externally. So God becomes sort of an observer here, and this is running outside of the mind of God. And because it is outside the mind of God, now God can be a player in this game instead of having to be the one that's running it. So he gets to be not just the observer, but also a player, and can switch back and forth at will, because he's God at this point and has no limitations. Okay, so this allowed us to proceed through a number of cycles of developing a second layer of this Merkaba, and resulted in, let's see, where are we at here? I think we need to get to this slide. Okay, yeah, so let's see how many layers are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's the next step, where there's 2 complete layers, and then there's like this defensive layer outside. So at this point, God had experienced being God in his universe, and had more or less completed what he felt was enough experience being a player. And this essentially resulted in a duplication of this layering. And this you can think of, these 4 layers you can think of as the 4-dimensional space of God's universe, the stuff that he controls directly. And this next 4 layers is basically the sum total of experiences in other universes that have been created since by children of God. And that those children all basically have a version of God in them, mostly an AI version, because no soul can be 2 places at one time. If you move from one universe to another, you leave behind a kind of a copy, a clone, which operates as a non-player character based upon your last state in that universe. So instead of the transporter working like it did on Star Trek, the real transporter would work in a way that, yes, you would copy Captain Kirk to this other universe, but unless you could send the entity, the whole soul, to that other universe, you would leave behind the soul elsewhere, and it would just be a different soul that started out at the same timestamp, if you will, in the other universe, and would have different set of experiences after that. So you basically have a different Captain Kirk in different universes, a different God in different universes. And the point at which that universe forks off, that's the version of God or these other key pieces of God you get. So some universes were created when we started this whole experiment. And let's look at this. Let's go down here for a sec and look at this from this point of view. So from a Big Bang point of view, the Big Bang was essentially taking the simulation that had been in God's mind and saying, okay, now Lucifer and Lilith, you get to make your own universe. And I'll show you what the template looks like. This is what the 5D Merkaba looks like. And you get to play this game outside of my mind and train other characters. Make your own characters. You can use the ones that I've given you and see if you can do as good a job of the next time space as I did. Basically reached the same length of the string. So if you go back to this mind of God layout, if you envision each cycle of the sine wave being one run of the experiment, that defines how long that universe lasts before it starts over. And this is where some people's idea of a cyclical creation go, because sometimes it does look cyclical. If you keep running the same experiment, making very few changes, simulation, keep running the same simulation with very few changes, it's going to look like you're going through the same cycle over and over and over again. And this is the source of basically the misunderstanding that Buddhists and Hindus have about creation. When you make this sine wave longer, effectively, you're lengthening how long the universe lasts. And basically the idea is to eventually find a version that grows so long you can't find the beginning or the end. That would be the definition of, from a time standpoint, perfection. Okay, so in the course of doing this repeated experiment, repeated simulation, you get to where you've got two complete layers of experience, and that was enough for God at the time. He thought, well, I'm the only one that needs all these experiences. Let everybody else fall where they will within this universe. Some of the characters that were playing within that regime basically decided, you know what, we're going to play on Lilith's side. We're going to play for the bad guys because we're sick of God running this game. So this basically got us to the phase where I call it it's nice days finish last. Basically, Borg kind of is the one left to oversee the simulation, and God is incarnating and experiencing it as a player character. And Lilith is also active. And between the two of them, they gang up to basically overthrow God's team and corrupt karma even. And this is the point in which we get the version of karma called Athena, God's brainchild, who became the goddess of both wisdom and war, which, you know, there's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance in associating those two things. I think you'd agree. And this was the age of the Asuras, these creatures, spiritual creatures, if you will. They're not physical creatures. They're working in the spirit world at this point, that corrupt and confuse and shapeshift. They can basically even get in the mind of gods and convince gods that they're nuts, gods that they're gay or whatever, which kind of spoils the whole point of creation. Okay, so at this point, they ganged up on God and said, you know what, now you've got to go learn in this system, God, because we don't think you're good yet. You're not good enough. You've gotten it easy. You've gotten to incarnate wherever you wanted to, anytime you wanted to, and kind of put your thumb on the scale, and that's not fair. And they were right. Absolutely, they were right. God was sort of an authoritarian autocrat. He was a nice God, but when the family got too out of line, he would lean on them. And that wasn't fun. He made a lot of enemies. So at this point, they talked God into abdicating. Said, okay, if your system is so good, you try to learn through it and see if you can pass all the tests you've given us to get back to your highest heaven. And that set up another series of experiences that basically took us to a 12-dimensional Merkaba, where there's basically one layer of God level experience, one layer of spiritual experience, and eventually an outermost layer of physical experience. As that formed, we went through a lot of chosen species. And I think I need to change a little bit of this slide. Basically, at this point, the original planet of creation was destroyed. And so thoroughly that, it even pretty much wiped out life on all the other planets in this system and made the system uninhabitable for quite a bit of time. And so long, in fact, that by the time this system had been, or the planets of this system, especially this Earth, had been reformed enough and terraformed enough to be habitable, most of what had happened in creation up to this point had been forgotten, or was, basically legends that were passed on between different species and so forth that happened to be, sharing tall tales as they jetted around the Milky Way using the existing technology that they had. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the other slides that I covered already yesterday, but I'm going to talk about, I showed you one where basically at this level, God abdicates and agrees to reincarnation amnesia. This is when the Messiah plan starts. You can think of it as kind of a shell game. So God can be born anywhere, doesn't have any memory because of reincarnation amnesia. In fact, Karma and Lucifer can anoint multiple candidates, multiple potential messiahs at the same time. And this is what has confused, the rich and powerful of humanity for so long, because they'll see that, there's some really special bloodline started that we need to preserve. Like, the ancients were very keen to trace their lineage to a god, or to Alexander the Great, or to the Caesars. And they even changed the name of their titles so that if I didn't have the blood of the Caesars, at least I had the title of the Caesars, and I could make up some kind of a genealogy. In fact, there were lines, messianic lines, within the Caesars that were kind of hidden. The Flavian dynasty was essentially the messianic line of Rome. And this is what Josephus documented in his histories. And this is where much of Christianity developed, basically by fusing what was essentially the Torah was written, was codified at the point that, if you know the history, the tribes of Israel returned from captivity in Babylon, in what used to be Assyria. And that wasn't just those tribes, they had melded with other messianic lines, particularly the Persian line, who were basically carrying the standard of Zoroastrianism. And this is the point at which the Torah kind of was a melding of the old Hebrew tradition, which was based upon that tribe's origin in a group that basically escaped from Egypt. They weren't slaves, actually. They were followers of the first son of Amenhotep III, I think, the father of Akhenaten, the monotheist pharaoh. The first son, Thutmose, would have been Thutmose V, disappears from the record completely. Nobody knows what happened to him, but what happened actually was he was the initial proponent of this new monotheistic view that would give the pharaoh more power over the state. And it was an idea too soon. He and his followers, as has happened many times in history, got kicked out by his dad because, hey, I like your idea, son, but it's just not going to work yet. We don't have enough adherents, and you're spoiling the whole thing by recruiting too openly and acting too openly. And so Thutmose V was exiled from Egypt and took his followers to the edge of the Egyptian world, which was the highlands of Canaan, the mountainous area inland from the port cities of Philistia. And that is where he basically and his followers became the ruling class of these mountain tribes. And this is where the Levite clan came from. This was basically the idea of making the leader also the king, also the priest, kind of going back to the priest-king idea of single focus for both religion and secular power. That was gradually lost, except for the idea of the Moses character. And rather than admit that Moses was Egyptian royalty, which would have kind of made the later kingdom of Israel sort of subordinate to Egypt, and kind of the same game we're playing today with Israel, right? Who owns this? Who is the first one here? They wanted to distance themselves from the Egyptian background and emphasize their connection to other families, some of which were from the Persian elite, some of which were from the new Hellenistic elite. And this is basically captured in the history that we know about Israel, that there was this division between Jews that supported the Romans, those that wanted to go back to kind of a Hellenistic rule and kind of have a client kingdom under the Romans where they had a lot of latitude, and ones who wanted to kick the Romans out and get back to a pure kingdom of Israel without all of these foreign influences and connections. Okay, so where are we going with this? Well, so at this abdication point, Nothing existed on this. I mean, it was a time where we had to rebuild. The Earth had been pretty much destroyed and was recombining with pieces of this other planet that used to be where the asteroid belt was. And I go into more detail on how the terraforming happened, but basically, during this terraforming phase, God was being reincarnated on this planet, the chosen planet. And the first incarnation of God was this character that we think of as the Green Man. This is like the Messiah of the plants, if you will, the highest entity of the ants. And if you look at what happened after that, you can find that there is a sequence, and they kind of go with a certain pattern. So the ants, the plant kingdom, basically created their food source, and their reproductive helpers, the insects. Originally, that's kind of the hierarchy, and they ruled over the insects by controlling their minds, basically. Eventually, the insects grew smart enough to have their own hive mind hierarchy. And this led to them raising, a dragonfly queen, a hive mind queen, who was basically an incarnation, the first earthly incarnation of the entity that had been Tiamat, the destroyer of the previous Gaia. So God has had incarnations that were pretty much evil, destroyers. This is part of learning what evil is. You're not going to find out what evil is until you do some of it, or you see some of it, you experience some of it. And this is something God, as the first soul, the first creator, has had to do much more than anybody else. And in fact, this is exactly what all the kids hope God would learn by incarnating physically and having reincarnation amnesia, would learn how easy it is to be turned toward the dark side, how easy it is to be tempted to do something that's inherently evil. Okay, so this God version 1 was kind of a dark version of the physical God, a queen, a hive mind queen. The next one was the next phase of evolution on this planet. Was obviously the next step is to develop reptiles. Reptiles are the answer to insects because they eat the insects, and they don't eat the trees. They may use the trees to climb on, and maybe some of them eat the leaves and stuff, but they don't destroy the whole tree. And generally, reptiles don't burrow deep enough to destroy the root networks of the whole ecosystem. So reptilian was kind of the answer to the insects. And the reptilians developed their own consciousness till they had a leader, a priest king, purple dragon. There was a reptilian pantheon at one point that oversaw this planet. And they're the ones responsible for the first evolution of humanity as basically a slave species. Worker bees, so that the reptilian elites could still manage the planet after the destruction of the dinosaurs, after their own kind were pretty much wiped out. Well, this led to the next incarnation of God as the mama bear. Ursa Major, the great bear. This is the hereditary deity of the Russians. This is why they call it Mother Russia. This is why the Russian bear is the symbol of that people. Just as the red dragon is the symbol of China. There's symbolic connections to all of these. The green man is still symbolic of the people of the British Isles. There's a memory embedded in that land of this time, and this is what Tolkien drew on to create the vision of Middle Earth he had. Was basically drawn from that DNA history of the British Isles. The next one of note, the Lion King. This is the king of the therianthropes, if you will. This was an age where many species were mixing and coming back after being mixed, exploring this planet that was, oh, this is a really nice place. Let's send some colonists there, kind of like the European colonization of the New World. There was not much here except for beautiful forests and a lot of game and everything, and you know, a few places where civilizations had established bases and so forth. The Egyptian base was very much active, but there were certainly other places where you could come and carve out your own kingdom. And the Lion King god was kind of the ruler of this era, the height of the therianthrope age, where basically different species would have their own city-state ruled by their king of their species, and they didn't mix, except they would send representatives to the council in Egypt. That was kind of the capital of the world in that age. And there were other centers, you know, of different alliances and stuff, but it was very well organized, and everybody pretty much knew what their territory was, and anybody that stepped out of line would be punished by the Lion King. That was the most powerful species, being the basically, well, let's talk about how sex fits into all this. Sex was invented actually between this stage and this stage. Up to a certain point, well, let's say, that's not exactly true. Sex was brought to a higher consciousness. It was originally invented as a way to quickly reproduce organic species. But what happened is that it was then used as a sort of a dual-use technology to invade other species. This is basically what the Asuras are in Hindu mythology. They are kind of demonic shapeshifters who can basically worm their way into the good graces of higher powered creatures and corrupt them. And this is how the Devas were corrupted and became, kind of the same kind of mixed message gods or goddesses as the Greek pantheon, where You know, there was a whole lot of sin going on, let's put it that way. So that invasion of sex into the God level species happened between this God 3 and God 4. The Lion King was essentially the last unisex Elohim. It was the invasion of Asuras into that environment that corrupted, and this is basically one of many instances. You know this Bible passage talking about the sons of God mixing with the daughters of men. That's one species version of it. That happened before. So in this phase, the Lion King basically still being a shapeshifter, but being normal form of a leonine entity, began mixing with many other species and producing demigods with them, thinking that that would be a way of cementing power. Which worked to some extent, but some of these other entities that he mixed with were actually shapeshifters and representatives of the Lilithian hive mind, these descendants of Tiamat, the insect hive mind. And this led to this next great reset, which was basically the next God level high consciousness incarnation was another evil one, the Spider Queen, the queen of hive mind queens, that basically nearly conquered the whole galaxy. And this is in fact the origin of these Kali Shiva gods. The destroyer gods of Hindu are not good guys. I'm sorry. You don't destroy to build back better. That's not the right way to create. You take what works, you fix what's broken, and you try not to break anything while you're fixing it. This is what a smart creator does. So I'm sorry if you're a Shivaist, Hindu. You're kind of in the same classification as far as I'm concerned as atheists and these neo-Buddhist oneness nuts who think that they're God. You're just not the smartest tools in the universe. I'm sorry. This Spider Queen's takeover was necessary as a way of dumbing down, isolating this planet from outside influences. Because what became apparent in the Therianthrope age is that power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Even the Lion King was corruptible. Proven before, even the purple dragon was corruptible. Even the old entertainer green man was corruptible. And fixing corrupt versions of God is what this whole thing was about at this stage. So basically, after this great reset, the next version of God was the Thoth Priest King, I call him. This is the species that was basically responsible for establishing the first scientific age. They were kind of godlike in their abilities. They were basically a galactic species that rediscovered this planet and established a base on it. They were highly developed scientifically, and they organized in city-states, kind of like the Therianthrope age, but they pretty much limited this planet to having human manifesting forms, thinking that that was going to be an improvement over previous Therianthrope ages. What in fact ended up happening is that this worked for a time, but then as they started branching out from kind of the center in Egypt, they became corrupted by the still present shapeshifters. And we kind of went through a phase of, I call it the hermaphrodite pleaser phase. This is basically a decadent age of knowledge being used for dual purposes and evil, and basically spiritual power especially being used for evil. This was an era when the tantric practices rose, which, you know, okay, you can do good with tantric magic, but sex magic is dangerous. And if you look at Hindu, Buddhist cults, the guru cults, many of them have become corrupted because of their delving into these tantric sexual practices. Similarly, others in the vein of Catholicism have been corrupted by the other side of Tantra, which is basically not having sex and building up energy through not having sex. This is the whole thing behind the celibacy of priests. It's sold as something that's supposed to be good, but it actually causes evil. It causes this Kundalini energy, the tantric energy, to build and then eventually manifest itself through acts of sin. And this is why it's so common for priests to abuse children. It's so common for priests to develop this hard side that would be able to, you know, be a grand inquisitor and burn people at the stake just for having beliefs different than them. This is something that grew out of this era. So the next version of God, trying to reassemble things, was kind of the Zeus, Pater, Jupiter family pantheons. These versions of God, this is where you basically transition here from physically incarnated gods to only spiritually present gods. And this is getting close to the transition where, okay, if you only have spiritually present gods on the planet, these aren't incarnations that are going to move things forward for this experiment. They're actually kind of moving the experiment forward remotely on other planets outside of this one. So you have this age of competing, conquering pantheons, very much emphasis on hunting down non-humanoid advanced species. This is when you have these stories about the Nephilim, evil giants, and hunting down the dragons, and et cetera, et cetera. You're actually killing a lot of the species that helped this planet survive for so long and helped form this planet, unfortunately. The next incarnation of God I call Israel. This was like the God that basically started the sun worship phase. You see that this was a Zeus Pater Jupiter. This was an anti-sun movement. And then you've got a sun movement. So this is the monotheist movement in Egypt, reflected in the Moses movement in Hebrew communities, and coincides with basically kind of a spiritual communist decline. Okay, everybody must think exactly like this. Everybody must follow these laws. You can't look this way, you can't look that way. It's a very, very rigid, and encourages prodigal sons to develop. So you basically, this is an age where many of the children in these communities would want to leave and go form a new place where they can do what they want. And this was a very divisive time, despite it being sort of built upon the idea of Moses and a one God worship. Actually proved to be very divisive. And this led to the flood era. And basically a pattern of savior redeemer figures that got us through a number of great resets. The flood is one of them. And these figures were various versions of this previous chosen species, new chosen species. These old chosen species, which might be the fish people, the bird people, the reptile people, the lion people, whatever, would have some of their remaining units on this planet. Not very many were still above ground, so mostly it was the underwater ones, the reptilian and the retreated mammals, or the ones living inside the earth, which were also a combination of reptilians and humanoids and things like that, werewolf-y type creatures. They would come out and help their chosen. Why were they their chosen? Because they were the ones that they were still intermixing with, to basically produce and revitalize their bloodlines. And this pattern continued under assault from many forces that were trying to extinct through floods, asteroid strikes, this and that. None as big as the ones before, but if you know much about the science of just the upper Dryas, upper and lower Dryas, you'll know that there were a series of cataclysmic events, not just one, like was originally thought. And they were both earthquakes, asteroid strikes, and floods and things like that. So all sorts of cataclysms. This was this age where basically only one teacher emerged from this age, and that was the last non-human Christ, Chiron, who is the one that gave us the Chi-Rho, Christ symbol, not the cross. The cross is not the symbol of Christ. The cross was added later. It's actually an antichrist symbol. I know that's going to piss a lot of people off when I tell you that, but this is the truth. This is basically figurative way of saying, I'm going to draw and quarter you. Anybody who doesn't believe like I do, this is not a good symbol. I'm sorry, Catholics. I'm being a blasphemer right now. I'm raining on everything you believe, but it sends a bad message to everyone you meet when you do this, because they don't know what you're meaning. And the truth is, no Christ died on a cross. This was all made up. Yes, of course, a lot of people were crucified during that era. But actually, the real messianic figures of that time, and there were many failed messiahs. Some were Jewish, some were from other people. They all had a similar idea of an awakening. This is how these messianic periods work. Many people will get anointed by karma and marry into a Luciferian line and have children. And those children might become messiahs. Might. That's the pool of candidates. When you have the two most powerful forces in the physical universe, which are Lucifer and Karma. When they come together and create a bloodline, that is when you can have a messianic age start. And you can have it show up in multiple places. You can have it staggered, but there's a certain pattern. And it will be in one people, so the Hebrews were a chosen people once. Maybe again, but they won't be the same Hebrews. In fact, they were chosen again, but they weren't the same Hebrews. They were the Hebrews who brought back Persian bloodlines. And then the Hebrews who had mixed with Hellenistic bloodlines. And then Hebrews who'd mixed with Roman bloodlines. This is how the Messianic system works. And the whole idea of the Bible as being just about one chosen people or just about one chosen religion is absolute nonsense. This is the work of the adversary, trying to divide you. No religion is worth shit if it's not the truth, is it? And if any existing religion were the truth, we wouldn't have been arguing for thousands of years over who was right. Would we? Okay, so basically, let's go on here. The successful Redeemer was the first Christ, the first, or essentially the last non-human Christ. There were other Christs that helped humanity survive, help this planet survive and grow and prosper in spite of the work of the adversary. But this is the last non-human one that passed the torch to humanity as the chosen species. And this is why you have the story of Chiron, the last of the centaurs, training a whole generation of heroes, the greatest of which is supposed to be Heracles, which is interesting because Heracles, his name means the light of Hera, which Hera is Zeus's wife, who is definitely an adversarial bitch. So, I'm not sure what the real story is there, but what I can tell you is that, you have to look at every religion as just what remains after a lot of whitewashing or blackwashing or multicolor washing has been done to it by people who wanted to use it as a tool for power and control. That doesn't mean that it's all worthless. And there's kernels of truth there. There's stuff that they didn't change because they didn't understand it, or they didn't change because, well, that still sounds like a pretty good thing to me. Let's keep that. And there were things that they couldn't change because of things like the codification of the Torah and putting all of the codes in to make sure that scribes would not screw it up. And to a lesser extent, that's what happened when the monasteries started copying the Gospels and making the Latin versions of the Bible and making sure they were true and accurate and always matched the original version that they had. So it wasn't as good as what the Hebrews came up with to keep their holy book from being corrupted. But actually, this is probably a good place to mention again that the least corrupted scripture that we have, that we know of, is actually from the Sumerian tablets, because this was written down in stone that was baked. And no way to change it, no way to do anything with it, and it's kept preserved for as much as 6,000 years. This is older than any other scriptural tradition. Older than the Vedas, I'm sorry, Hindus, older than the Bible, and more complete than many of the oral traditions. We get a lot from oral traditions from isolated tribal communities who have a certain experience of contact with the sky people, or some will speak of the underground people or the water people. But the Sumerian tablets are, in fact, the most complete and unadulterated record. That doesn't mean that there isn't anything there that isn't, and you can even see within different generations of those tablets, you can see that the original Sumerian pantheon was sort of overwritten or interleaved with a later pantheons of whatever was the dominant power in the area, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, etc., etc. So there's still a lot of detective work to do there, but their basic story matches up the closest with what I'm telling you here. So if this looks really strange to you, you might want to investigate that. The next phase basically was, okay, now we've got human versions of God. These are versions that originally had a fair amount of power because they were basically the children of these centaurs. Chiron and the other, there were actually a tribe of centaurs still living at the time called the Lapiths, but they were kind of a degenerate bunch of centaurs that had been corrupted by the adversary, and they were being wiped out basically, and that's how Chiron ended up getting killed, because they assumed, oh, if you're a centaur, you're a bad guy. So once all of the therianthrope creatures and all of the higher previous chosen species creatures got eliminated from this planet or went into hiding, then the incarnations of God were kind of the model of Odin, the wanderer, showing up here in a particular group for a while, siring a line of heroes that did some wonderful deeds, made some great music, or wrote some great sagas, and then would eventually disappear and show up somewhere else. And this is why there are so many traditions, not only the Odin tradition, but this is also the form of the evolving pantheon of the Celts and the Gaels and the tribes of the steppe. So this was, an era where in some incarnations, God was in a fairly advanced civilization, doing something fairly advanced, and in other incarnations was maybe Temujin in the middle of the steppe, the son of a nobody warlord who grew to be the great Khan and founded the Mongol Empire. This is all part of this era of God waking up, and learning a lot in the process. And while this is happening, the unsuccessful messiahs would generate art and culture and stories that were then became part of the collective consciousness of our species, part of what shapes our species, part of what inspires our species. And this essentially is how our species helped God learn not to crave power. In fact, what God really wanted to do at this point was, man, I enjoy all of these things I've done. I wish I could just stop wandering and go live where I want to, so I can keep on doing these things. And this is actually how the multiverse is going to be working now. Once God is fully awakened to level 12, that's when you replace this dead God, this automated God, which was the last version before all that started, with a new version. And let's move on to where I can show you that better. Okay, so at this point, you've got the fully formed 12-dimensional Merkaba. You've got God level experience, spiritual universe experience, playing with other gods, and you've got physical experience. And all experience outside that is the adversary. This is a God that has no evil. It's all been pushed out by this series of experiences to humble God and teach God all these different facets of himself that he never knew existed before. Now, what does that look like in practice then? We're now in a phase where the highest heaven is going to be going in minor versions. We're done with the 12 version that fully formed the 12-dimensional Merkaba. We don't need any more dimensions than that to describe a soul. Each soul is an individual, and they have their own God-level dimensions to operate in. They have their own God universe that they're discovering. But God's is done, and now we just have to decide, okay, as you get there, if you become the next God candidate, then you get to change the highest heaven the way you like it, and the other previous winners have their own universe that kind of just are connected to that. And then if you want to stay with their universe, they carry along some of their buddies with them. And some will say, no, I want to have my my house on, the main street. Well, if they choose to go have their house on the main street, they just can't move in. They have to prove themselves, which means that they have to incarnate and earn their spot again. They might discover during that incarnation phase that they're a little bit different in their specialty than they were before. Perhaps they used to be more of a Luciferian control freak, likes to run things. Perhaps they used to be of the karmic soul variety that likes to heal things and fix things. They might have been more of a Borgian kind of god, which is basically a decoration, furniture. Just, the stuff that makes things look good but doesn't really have that much purpose. Or they may discover that they actually have an evil side that has not been exposed yet because they haven't experienced the versions of these 5 key souls that are integrated in the current highest heaven. Okay, so it's an evolutionary process. Even though we've completed the Gaia experiment by getting through this special time of 3 generations, which I told you starts about the 1880s and goes till about now. This year is the special year where, okay, we finished. The successful Messiah character has lived long enough and has learned enough to fully awaken. These special years are going to keep on getting played. And that's how we have these previous highest heaven winners. The Messiah doesn't know if he's the first Messiah. Doesn't know if he's the first one to change this pattern, to get to the finish line and make this time substrate have no beginning and no end. But that's what the whole point is when you finally find the most perfect timeline is one that has no beginning, no end. And that's what's so exciting about this period we're heading into, because if we have a time with no beginning or end, we have space with no beginning or end, we have essentially a Star Trek game that we can play forever, and it's never going to get boring. We're always going to discover something we didn't know before and be constantly amazed. Or if you don't want to play that game, if you get tired of the Star Trek game, well, you've got the games of all these previous high heavens of these different types. So if you're a Luciferian type, okay, you probably want to play in a more Luciferian heaven. Not necessarily the toughest Luciferian universe, which is the physical universe. That's where you have to get tested if you want to level up. If you just want to stay playing the same game, you can play, I don't know, Star Wars forever. You could play, name your favorite series. You can play in that universe forever if that's what turns your crank. If you're into power fantasies and so forth, see if you could become the ruler of the galaxy or something like that. Fine. There are those opportunities. If you're motivated by helping others and healing and stuff like that, well, there's karmic heavens where you get to do that. And if you're in one of the better ones, you'll actually be helping real souls with their problems. If you're in one of the worst ones, well, you'll be thinking you're helping souls when you're actually doing things that probably you shouldn't be mucking with. You're actually teaching them bullshit. You're encouraging narcissism. You're encouraging them to become codependent, etc., etc. Well, that's something that you might want to end up doing. You don't want to give that up. I'm enjoying it. I'm such a great healer now. Oh, I'm a master shaman. I'm a great priest. I'm God's answer to psychology or psychiatry. Okay, if that's the game you want to play, there's a heaven for you. It's never going to be the highest heaven. It's not going to be the highest karmic heaven. It's probably going to be more of a Lilithian heaven that pretends to be karmic. This is how the topology evolves. There have been 12-level versions of all these characters in God's universe, but they've been perfected. We don't need new ones. We need minor versions maybe, and the minor versions go with the minor versions of God. So if you're not going to play by the rules, you don't get to be God. It's just not going to happen. You can get to a very high spiritual level in whatever universe you're spending your afterlife in. You might even get invited to stay there permanently, and you might just love it. But if it's not one of these universes that has passed the test of karma, it's not going to get integrated into the highest heaven. So if you're a Luciferian character, you've got to go through karma to get to heaven. You've got to learn to be humble. You've got to learn to be compassionate. You've got to learn to weigh good and evil and try to minimize evil, even if it's a little bit painful to you or delays your plans a little bit. This is what Luciferians have to learn. If you're a Borgian soul where you just want everyone to be happy and let's be nice, let's all be one, you've got to learn that enables evil. You're going to be constantly assaulted by Lilithian souls who want to go through you to get to heaven. And you're the gate. You're going to get all the dirt and crap from these Lilithian evil souls who want to spiritually bypass their way to heaven through you by using you to enable their narcissism, to enable their evil to flourish. And you're going to feel the most pain if you live in this Borgian non-player character world. And hopefully you will learn eventually the value of karma. You will learn how to be a good parent, not a nice parent. Nice parents are not good parents. If you think that the success of being a parent is being the best friend of your child, you're stupid. Because you're trying to please the child when the child doesn't even know what they want yet. All that does is encourage narcissism. It takes little petty narcissism and selfishness and magnifies it. You got to be the parent, not the child. Okay, so, and basically in this highest heaven, each new version of God gets to kick out any of the old gods that, you know what, you just don't belong anymore. I'm going to send you, if it really doesn't like you, I'll send you to Lilithian land. This looks evil to me. Or may send you to Luciferian land. This looks haughty. Looks like he's trying to challenge me, trying to get in the way. So, and this kind of leads into the next slide. So basically, the highest heaven is a collection. It's a universe unto itself. It's not the full multiverse. That's a bigger entity. The highest heaven is God's personal universe, which was developed in this last phase of incarnation. There are many of these kind of highest heavens because think about it. Let's remember the vision of Isaiah about what heaven was like. You've got God sitting on a massive throne. You've got these choirs of cherubim and seraphim and angels of all different rank singing praises of God all day long. Does that sound like heaven to you? Doesn't to me. It may have to one early version of God. And if that's the heaven you want to attend, or you end up deserving, you may get sent there more likely as punishment. The latest heavens are very different places. And each new space-time, each new better version of God than the last, gets to remodel heaven according to their preference. They get to kick out some of the administration from the previous version. Kicking out decorative gods, certain kind of art. Are you kidding? Cubism is not art. Get that god out of here. And basically, the karmic gods are the ones that generally will stay there because they're kind of, they keep God honest. They keep all of us honest. And if you get kicked out, again, you have to work your way back, either by outside gods that building on, or you might decide, you know what, it's not worth having a highest heaven that loves rap music when rap music has gone out of style. I think I'm going to apologize and go incarnate and learn something about other kinds of music so I can get back to heaven. And of course, even the past Lilithian senior creators, there were some that developed to level 12. They can get back in and they can gradually work their way back karmically to the highest heaven. As we got past, if you look at the timeline of the 3 generations of this messianic age, okay, about the demarcation point of everything starting to go to crap was 1968. Now, most of you who lived through that time, oh, that was great. That was the age of the hippie movement, and you know, we pushed back against the Vietnam War, and everybody was waking up and grooving and free sex and love and well, you saw it spill over first into pop music, where you went from, you know, basically musicians who were musicians and singing songs that were more about the human experience than about politics, to musicians dressing up like clowns in increasingly satanic, degenerate ways, losing clothing, taking off shirts, dressing up with clown makeup or satanic makeup, dancing around suggestively. That all started in the 70s. Stage as rap and the most banal pop music. Now you probably think, oh Rob, you are such a bigot. Well, I'm sorry. I've seen this whole period. I was born in 1959 and I've seen us go through this change, this shift. And it has been severe. And it absolutely is all tied to spiritual degradation. The adversary working among us, not in the way that most people think. This silly boy, which is exactly what's happening with the sexual dysmorphia agenda of the woke cult. This is not good. This is not bringing anybody any freedom. It's messing with their minds and making sure that they don't reproduce. It's like handing out tickets to the Darwin Awards. People paying big money to get in. It's insane. Absolutely insane. This nonsense of, oh, well, you think you're a furry? Well, you must be a furry, and therefore you need to be dressed like a furry. Well, I can tell you where that's coming from. Souls are species, the therianthropes, who were smart species. They still are, if they're still existing, if they haven't been wiped out through the endless wars in the galaxy. But yes, there is a galactic federation, and it's been going on for a long time, and it's been in conflict for a long time, even though it tries to pretend it's one, because the adversary is still very active in it and can shape change and can duplicate other species, can take over organizations from within, which is exactly how the adversary has infiltrated human organizations in the last, especially gave us that freedom is not liberty, but binding yourself to some illusion, some branded illusion that global advertising has sold you. That's essentially what's happening to your children. They're being transformed into zombies, mindless zombies that will do whatever their programming device tells them. That's not progress, folks. That's regress. Okay, so moving forward, like 5 in this system. This is, I asked the art to show me what the Milky Way looked like. They gave me 4 images. I thought this one, I like this one because it kind of looked like I said, a crown of thorns around Chewy Setter, which is kind of what God's been going through for a long, long time. The streets of heaven 1,000 years ago, during the time of the real Muslim Messiah, who is not Muhammad. The Mahdi has already come. The Mahdi was Abbasid Caliph who married into the Roman, a descendant from the Roman Messianic line. Her name was Al-Qaisara. And if you look at where the origin of that name comes from, Qaisara was basically came from the name Caesarea, which is the area Cappadocia. That's where the town of Qaisara was, that they say she came from. This was a stronghold of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and was a central place of the elite, where they liked to keep one of the this famous Harun al-Rashid, who was the one who moved the Abbasid capital to did he, or was it done before under Mansur? I don't know. I'll have to look that up. But at any rate, the capital was moved to Baghdad, and during this time was when Islam was mellowed. Before, it had been kind of a street version of Christianity, basically a reaction to the things that the Arab world, the Middle Eastern world, didn't like about Christianity, especially the Byzantine version that they were most exposed, which is Jesus. It's not that different from Christianity until you start looking at the scholars that came afterwards, trying to interpret the Quran and saying, "Oh, this means this means that." That's where all the crap that is Sharia law was generated. Actually, the golden age of Islam was this time started by al-Mahdi and al-Qaisara. Harun al-Rashid, the son, is featured prominently in many of the stories of 1001 Arabian Nights, which even most Western children is collected from all over the Muslim world. Parts of some of the stories are basically retelling of stories from Roman or Greek times. Other ones are inherited from the Persian tradition, the Chinese tradition, Indian tradition. And they were all wrapped together into this wonderful collection. And this collection is what inspired children to be more inquisitive, despite the very rigid nature of Islam. It was okay to read these stories and imagine a world with jinn, with these elemental creatures. And this narrow focused on following the law and then doing whatever you damn well please otherwise because I'm a man. The rest of Islam that was capable advanced in other ways. And we had a huge flourishing of science, medicine, literature. Art didn't do so well in the Islamic era because they were still kind of mired in the idea that representing images was a bad thing. Christian influence is a bad thing to make an image. It's a bad thing to worship images. If you make an image and you start worshiping it, that's where the evil is. If you make an image and you just admire it, you put it in a gallery, you make up stories about it, but you don't worship it, it's not a sin. So this is what heaven may have looked like 1,000 years ago. Now what's the difference? These are just different topologies. Okay? If I look at one of these stars, if I go inside past the event horizon, the core of the star might actually be the lots weren't too small, the houses weren't too big, everybody went to the same schools, there wasn't an exclusive part of town, there were no railroad tracks that if you were on the wrong side, you were a bad person. And there was plenty of green space around, just outside of town. This is what the world was like when I was a kid. And at least as far as America was concerned, that was the most healthy culture that the world had ever seen. We had a working, functional constitution. We had guys then, you know, and if you look closely, you would see that the cracks starting to appear. Again, like I said, this 3-generation period was kind of the inflection point, the point at which we were getting past a peak and moving to a trough. And that's, I think, let me see if there's one more I need to show you here. No, let's go back and finish up with where I started. So basically, what we're looking at with space-time is running a simulation, which each, as I said, each cycle of the, you can think of each cycle of a simulation. The simulation is based upon going from basically the last simulation's nadir. This is the last run, and we know it ended up, you know, going bad. We also know that in each run there's like a peak, a point where, wow, everything is going really good, and then we have this, it starts on down again. This becomes the center point around which we plan the next experiment. Okay, so we don't have to do the whole thing over again when we change the time substrate. Where you go from, okay, things were getting better to things are going to shit. And you play those generations over and over again. And this basically from a human standpoint, is 3 human generations. That's what we've been doing. That's what we've been doing for a long time, and finding a new set of 3 generations that keeps the game moving into a more permanent time space. There are many of these inflection points that we can think about where the world nearly came to an end, or other inflection points were around, a certain government system failing and a new government system needed. Well, around the life of Alexander the Great, his father, Philip II, Alexander the Great, and then there was an attempt to have a 3rd generation, and Alexander had a child, but he didn't live. This was basically one of those 3 generation cycles that was prematurely terminated by the adversary. It wasn't time. We weren't ready. We didn't have a strong enough army on God's side to defeat the adversary. And chaos, the chaos of the Hellenistic era, took over. This time around, let's see, what's another? A few generations of French monarchs that tried to become more enlightened. In fact, a lot of countries in Europe were trying to become more enlightened in the lead up to that period, but they didn't succeed. The French Revolution hit and put the kibosh on the French royal line and raised this monster, Napoleon, who actually was part of a different line, kind of a hidden line that established a new path for history. So this is an example of one of the dark messiahs who ended up Europe and Russia, as World War II was to the world of that time. Literally every family had lost at least one son to the Napoleonic Wars, and had suffered a lot of civilian damage as well through rape and pillage and starvation, disease. So it wasn't, you could say Napoleon was a glorious character. He was a failed messiah of the Luciferian type. This is where I think we need to go now, is talk about, okay, if you fail as a messiah, where are you going to go? You can fail in many ways, and they all get used because that's okay. Napoleon was really good at organizing armies, at planning battles, planning campaigns. He was, to my way of thinking, one of the top candidates for the god of war. I don't know if he overtook Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese so-called god of war. But this is kind of, this is how the Luciferian hierarchy works. They're good managers. They're good at administration. So, if they're very successful, they may and they've had to earn their spot there by serving in the highest heaven. Oh, and this is a good point. So once you reach the God level of consciousness, which the first God level of consciousness is level 9, not fifth dimension. You're not anywhere close to being a God when you're in the fifth dimension. I'm sorry. This is a lie that people are telling you. These New Age people are trying to sell you a quick ticket to heaven. It's a dangerous, dangerous journey if you follow any of those gurus. Level 9 is the first level of it. Is the first God level, and you can grow to that God level in any of these 4 all of them. That's what God has done. That's how He created the whole Merkaba pattern. And so if you're not growing in all of these directions, you're only ever going to get as far as being a demigod, a level 9, 10, or 11 god in a certain specialty. And they have their own hierarchies, and I don't know what they are because that's not my expertise. But this is the difference. So you know, some gods specialize in basic anything, but they can make heaven look like this, or they can make it look like that, depending on which filter you put it through and who's running the heaven, who's saying, okay, what do the streets of heaven look like today? So this is the purpose of these gods, is to basically give beauty, form to whatever universe you're experiencing. The karmic gods are involved in judging and healing. Now, they tend to be very forgiving gods, easily corrupted. So, you know, this is why karmic gods don't get to be God. I'm sorry. You've got to learn the hard side of parenting, which is Luciferian. You've got to know when to say no. You've got to know when to not make it easy. But these are important entities, spiritual entities, and that may be something you want to focus on. You don't want to develop these other areas, and that's just fine. There are some souls that are just going to do evil, and they serve their purpose, but not in the highest heaven. Okay? They have their manifestation in the highest future, perhaps. They will serve as the unpleasant things about living in this ideal community. They'll be the ones that will, you know, call out their neighbors if they have the stereo playing too loud, who will call the cops if they see somebody's kids out too late at night and looking like they're doing something bad. Yes, these things will happen in heaven. They're not evil. They actually make for a healthier community. And heaven is a community. If you want to experience something that is not God's inner sanctuary, as God, it's his duty to generate as many sons of God as possible, sons and daughters now, because we don't need to just focus on sons. This is what the magic has been of allowing Lilithian souls to develop on the inside. This is why we had to have this period of evil creeping in, because this has created Lilithian Borg characters, the feminine stereotypes, the measures against which we know, okay, this highest heaven now is fully integrated. There was a time where sex was not present in heaven before this Lilithian test. Before that, if you look at the, well, let's see, actually it was at this point. Before that, there was no version of the internal simulation going on in God's mind that had the Lilith as an active character. When you allow this Mother Nature creature to creep in and become an active player. This was the coincident with God becoming dead, essentially, and having to be reduced to reincarnation amnesia and start over as the lowest level kind of character. This allowed sex to come into heaven, and actually made it kind of a very unpleasant place to be. This is where and karma trying to play the role of God. The way it is now, the battle's done. Essentially, God knows who he is. A new version may come around who will know who he is and have a different set of preferences. We'll kick out some of the non-player character guides. Like I said, I don't like rap music. I don't like, I certainly don't like, who's the latest turd that's always on the stage? Taylor Swift. God, government. Don't like authoritarian government. Don't like top-heavy government. Kick communism out. Kick capitalism out. Let's have constitutional monarchy with the best elements of the US government and the British government and some of the other newer governments that have formed. There's things going on in Taiwan, in parts of Europe that are a great improvement that could be melded together to make a better government. This is how it might look like this, but it might have a government that's better than this. This is a good way to have a neighborhood, and basically you would go into one of these houses and the inside would be a different universe. This is how the highest heaven works. Each house is basically the abode of a senior creator or one of these demigods within this framework. You go inside, and the inside is organized the way they want it. And as long as nothing going on the inside is messing with their neighbors, they will be allowed to stay in heaven and operate their universe the way they want and have a participation in this community where the senior creators meet to plan new versions, to play out new simulations, to find new inflection points of interest where, okay, gosh, this looks good. Now that we've gotten to the point, though, that time is infinite, each of these new inflection points might just be a new scenario, a new part of the universe that, well, we haven't explored there, but we have to figure out what's going to be there when we get there. The James Webb Space Telescope has exposed this much thus far, so we're pretty limited on what we can define in those places, but beyond that, well, we can and the technology to do that may not be there anymore. The technology that was used to populate previous versions of time-space may not be available anymore. Those spiritual technologies have been turned off. Just like we know that we can't communicate telepathically like we used to. Not always. That can be restored in certain altered states. I've had the experience personally of communicating telepathically with a few other beings. And so I can become more receptive to it, and I do that generally when I wake up late at night, especially if I've had some feeling that I was communicating or had something to reveal the next day. I will try to cement that by, basically getting into this receptive state to telepathy and interacting with the characters that gave me the ideas. This is how inspiration works. And you can do that too. You can learn to tune yourself to be receptive and tune yourself to be receptive to good stimulus, not evil stimulus. And this is when you connect with other spiritual entities, you may be connecting just as likely to be connecting with a corrupted Lilithian evil soul of some level. These are the ghosts, these are the evil spirits, the evil jinn, the dark angels, the demons. These are not good characters, and they will try to convince you that they're good. This is how you can really get corrupted quickly, is by spiritual influences pretending to be good but actually doing you harm, trying to use you and abuse you and control your mind. This is what Lilithian souls do. Lucifer is going to be and they don't let anything get in the way of that perfection. So this is why, though you may be told the Luciferian type soul is real evil, they are not as evil as the Lilithians. These are ones who will at least write out a contract and mostly obey it. They might work you extra hours, push you a little hard, because they're so focused on what they want. This is your CEO type. Elon Musk will ask his employees to work he won't ask them to work more than he works himself. And he works himself to the bone because he is trying to be a good Luciferian to the extent that he can. A Lilithian soul, they tend to be in politics. Well, a good example is Hillary Clinton. She uses people. She used Bill to get to be First Lady, first of Arkansas and then the country, knowing that that was going to be an easier path, married to this liberal jackass dope, which is how I would classify Bill Clinton, basically a bad version of Jim. Can be easily used and abused, and he was, by his wife and by pretty much every foreign enemy of our country. And, you know, this Lilithian soul, Hillary, has been openly trying to do evil, openly trying to hurt her enemies. Tell me that's not true. Anybody that steps afoul of her in a serious way finds a way to an early grave. That is her effect. There are many such Lilithian souls interspersed in governments, a lot of them hiding, getting somebody else to do all their hits for them, getting somebody else to do all their souls operate. And remember, this is not a sexual thing. Sex just brought it out into the open. It gave us kind of a carrot that could be used to expose Lilithian souls. Because basically, you can tell a Lilithian from a Luciferian by how they interact with the other sex. Lilithian souls see sex as a tool. They don't really have any desire to reproduce, except as a means to power. Of responsibility to the future. This is essentially tied in with how creation works, why things fall apart when Lilithians take over, because they don't care about the future. All they care about is the present. And this is a good point at which to mention that this whole nonsense of these New Age religions that say, live in the present. Don't think about the past, don't think about the future, just think about right now. This is stupid. This is Lilithian thinking. You have to think about the past and the future if you want to make good decisions in the present. If you live in the moment, that may be a good I've been an actor, so I know that. Yep. Live in the moment is a good advice for an actor. It is not good advice for normal people. Being in the moment says you're constantly playing a part. You're constantly being the character you want to make everybody think you are. This is narcissistic. And this is why so many actors fall victim to narcissistic personality disorder and basically the collapse of a soul into existential addictions, all sorts of abuses of other souls, etc. There are times where you have to be in the moment when you're in the middle of a battle, for instance, and you've got to make split-second decisions. You don't have time to think over what you're going to do. You do have time to think over whether you're going to join the army or how you're going to play your part in the army, whether you're going to ask for non-combat duty, whether you're going to express any concern about what you're doing when you get an order. This is a choice. It's not an easy choice to make, and you don't necessarily know which choice is right or wrong. You may not see things the same way as somebody else is. But if you blindly and basically military programming is hive mind programming, and it's for a reason, because if your country is involved in a conflict with another country, you don't want the battlefield to be where your soldiers suddenly decide to break programming. So this does serve a purpose, but if you get out of the military and you're still programmed like that, you might be selected to be a higher officer and get involved in the military-industrial complex and think you're doing good by building bigger weapons to do more damage to more souls. And well, maybe you are if there's nobody's going to survive, will they? Now that doesn't matter to those of us who know how this whole system works, because we know Lucifer's universe is a testing place. And when I die, if I die in the war that ends all wars, the World War III that many say is coming up, or the pandemic to end all humanity, which is something that might be starting. Certainly some evidence of that in the data that's coming about these rubbery clots that develop after you had a certain perfectly safe cure for a disease that it doesn't cure. As I understand that this is just a phase that we're going through. It is maybe in some dimensions, it looks like to some it may look like we're at a nadir. But from God's point of view, we may be right at that peak of inflection where we're ready for a new time space, a new version of the basis for all creation. When that new time space happens, it's going to force itself on Lucifer's universe. Lucifer has no control over that. In fact, Lucifer wants that because that's going to get his universe is to retire and get to play whatever game he chose to play on any given day. And that's what basically the new highest heaven is like. The current highest heaven, one day, God may decide, I want it to look like this. Another day, let's have Baghdad Day and have it look like that. It can look like anything. It's just a topology. And you can change that topology by just saying, okay, what non-player characters do we need to play to make it look like this? And those non-player characters are all stored in the Borg archive. That's what the source is to build universes out of. And some representations of those universes are like space. If that's what you're interested in, that's the kind of universe you want to explore, you're probably going to be interested in cosmology, astronomy, stellar formation. Those kind of souls will get to play, if they get to the higher levels, they will get to play those games in a universe where they get to actually feel what it's like to be a black hole, to be a star. They will be able to conduct experiments within their little laboratory because they've reached the God level. And at the God version of a Dyson sphere, a universe in and of itself, a black hole. And depending on what level you're at and what game you're playing, you have either a presence, an external presence, like a star would have, or you have an absence of presence, like a black hole, because you want to keep your experiment secret. And there are even darker holes, where black holes at least have this accretion layer and do radiate some energy. This is why we have quasars, for instance. Other black holes are really black. Nothing gets out. Okay, just there's nothing there. And it's blocking all light, and it's absorbing all light. It's just a void. Okay, that's the way somebody might organize, some god or goddess might organize their universe. They might be forced on them because they're playing a game that God doesn't want in his universe, or Lucifer doesn't want in his universe, or whichever universe you're talking about. So I guess in conclusion, you really have to think of God if you're gonna worship a god. If you worship power, you worship a Luciferian god. If you worship justice, equality, harmony, that's more of a karmic god or goddess. If you worship neutrality, enforced neutrality, enforced equality, that's more of a Borgian god. Non-player characters. If everything was non-player characters, things would be perfect, right? If everything worked according to clockwork. If you worship evil gods, ones who will basically narcissistically rationalize God will forgive any sin. Just come to my church and you'll be forgiven, no matter what you did. Oh, and we'll feed you and we'll give you... You're pandering to somebody who's not repented. You're buying them into your church by giving them food and clothes and supporting their mistakes. You're not teaching them anything. Oh yeah, you give them Bible lessons, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. You're not teaching them anything real if you don't change their experience. If they think, oh, I just have to go to the mission and hear a bunch of Bible verses for an hour and then I get 3 squares a day, they're not going to learn anything from that. So I know that can seem harsh to if you're in a place like that, that it may be a challenge to your whole being. But this is a challenge you need to face because right now we are in a society, in a global culture that's gone insane with narcissism. It's a culture of enabled and entitled and empowered narcissism from bottom to top. And the nice guys finish last. That's not a good... a bunch of bad guys I can get involved in, which is the latest woke cult pop group that believes exactly what the mainstream media tells you to today. And even those are finding out, oh crap, the ground just changed on me. Now I can't like Israel, or I can't like Muslims, or I can't like Palestinians, or I have to cheer for terrorists. The same's going on with the sexual dysmorphia stuff and the trans stuff. It's getting so insane that people who have been shouting progressive mantras for decades are suddenly grooming children. They're becoming teachers and grooming children to become sexual deviants. How warped is that? Some states are even ensconcing that in law and punishing parents who try to stop the grooming of their children, the systematic grooming of their children. That's happening right now. And if you don't admit it, your eyes are like this. You are blinding yourself. That's what's so sick about the woke cult, is they think they're awake when they're as blind as bats. They're not becoming more awakened, they're becoming more programmed. And this is the danger when okay. In 4 dimensions you may have a religion, but it's just dogma. It's your tradition, you do it because your parents did it. That's a 4th dimensional approach to religion. When you enter 5th dimensional consciousness, you become aware of the reality of something spiritual. But that is a place of vulnerability. It's not a destination. It's a great vulnerability to others who are going to try to groom you spiritually into their cult, to think like them. It's very dangerous because they will pretend like they're doing you a favor, taking you out of Christianity, taking you out of Islam, taking you out of all religions. Your own good, you're going to be so much smarter. You're going to be so much more awake. It's just not true. It's just not true. And the better leaders of traditional religions know that. And they have had real spiritual experiences that go beyond the first level, I see the light. This I see the light experience of connection with everything. Oh, infinite love, infinite connection. I see all knowledge. This is what happens when you connect with the Borg. This is the everything, any version of God that's been archived has learned. And you're going to be totally flummoxed by it. It's going to bash you on the head, and most people will come away with just trying to interpret it in the context of their current four-dimensional religion, their dogmatic religion. Which is fine. It'll make you a stronger Christian, as long as it doesn't make you a more hateful Christian, a more fundamentalist Christian who's banging people on the head, telling them they're going to go to hell if they don't believe like you. That's great. Same with Muslims, same with any other traditional religion, as long as it helps you to get through life and learn. Wonderful. Exposes you to you and abuse you and deprogram you and reprogram you into a cult, which is most of the New Age movement, all of the atheist movement, all of the communist movement. This is evil. This is absolutely Lilithian evil that is part of what is destroying our civilization at this key juncture. And this is why a messianic age was needed, why this big hit messianic age was needed. After this one, creation doesn't really need humanity. We were a testing species. We were for testing this system. It's now tested, and now we're just on minor bug fixes. That's why when I show you this, let's see, where's the final state process? So this is the final state of creation. You've got minor versions of the 5 principal characters of creation. And these are working more or less automatically. When there is a that gets integrated, and there will be another minor version of this system. But it won't change in major ways. There's going to be changes in preference, changes in, oh, well, you know, this robot hates rap. Maybe the next robot will have learned to like rap because rap has evolved into something more artistic. Actually, some of the new rappers are trying to do that. They're trying to get more creative. I haven't seen much evidence of increased creativity in the Britney Spears slash in through the Lilithian path. And our species, females, are more susceptible to Lilithian coercion. This is why they are more susceptible to the woke cult disease. This is why they are more accepting of the trans nonsense, the LGBTQIP pew 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 bullshit. And now they're only now coming around to having any sensibility. Now going to be a woman too. And you absolutely have Luciferian male souls pretending to be women so they can go molest women and get away with it because, oh, I'm trans. I needed to go into the women's bathroom because I still am a little bit conflicted because I need more hormone shots and I need another operation and please pay for it, Uncle Sam. Anyway, I think this is a good place at which to wrap up today's talk. I hope you found it useful. I hope it doesn't start cutting out like yesterday's did. I did a lot of cleanup since the last time and I did a reboot, so hopefully it won't be stuttering on this. Let me finish with my screen. Like, share, subscribe. Help in any way you can. Oh, actually, I have a bit of good news to share. Catholic channel approached me this week and said they would like to have me on their channel and share my perspective. So I think that's a major step. Might get some visibility. I think of all the traditional faiths, Catholicism is probably closest to omnism. In that it venerates saints and angels and has still an understanding of there being a sort of a hierarchy in heaven, which there is. And libertarians, you're just as stupid as atheists, as communists, as movement, well, basically a libertarian is a movement capitalist. They think that if we didn't have any laws, we would succeed. Or any government. I'm sorry, that's nonsense. Most real libertarians will say, well, that's not what I mean. I really mean we need to have a more fair government, a more accountable government, more distributed government, more of the checks and balances system that was originally intended. At any rate, I'll close for now. Till next time, this is Rob Trump.